know that you can have different timeline versions of yourself come forward and offer you mentorship? Well, we're going to talk about that in a multidimensional chakra scan I just did for a client and how that can help you on your journey. Before we get into it, I have asked my higher self to help me channel these chakra scan messages, so that way if you have a similar architecture or energetics or things that have happened in your timelines, it'll help unlock things on your soul contract and bring them forward. My intention was to go in this person's chakras, but then we ended up transcending above them and we went into different dimensional planes. And so when I went into their root chakra, what happened was I was in the woods and all of a sudden this little goblin creature came forward and I was like, "Ooh, who are you?" And he asked me to hold his hand and we start walking through the forest together, and I saw this cottage. And this has happened several times in different people's readings where I'll meet like a child and they're called children of the forest or children of the woods. Even though they look like children, they're kind of, but not really. Okay, so I was telling this person, it's like you're 1,000 years old, but you're only a couple hundred years old. So you're kind of a child within that timeline of that 1,000 years, but you're not like a human type of child. And so I went in the cottage with the goblin and I saw her. It was her in a different timeline, my client, and she was like mixing up these herbs in a ground thing. I can't remember the name of it, but y'all know what I'm saying. Anyway, so I said, "Oh, are you one of her guardians?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And so she asked me if I wanted some bread, and I said, "Yeah, that'd be great. I love bread." And so we're all sitting at this table together, and 111 on my phone, and she was explaining that my client here would do great with Celtic Reiki because she needs to learn how to listen to the woodland spirits, not necessarily the animals, but definitely animals, but more so like trees and plants. And there's other spirits like elemental spirits and like the energy of the whole forest and woods. And Celtic Reiki is a great way to get into those things. So I explained how she could get into that more in depth. And then that other timeline version of her gave her an etheric emerald necklace to wear that helps amplify those energies. And I asked if she could tell me a little bit more about the goblin creature. Okay, because the goblins are cousins to fairies. Okay, they all live in the Fae kingdom, but they're a little different from one another. And she said, "Oh, that's my friend. He's a procurer of things." And I said, "Oh, what does that mean?" And she says he finds things for me. He can find things physically or energetically. And then her other timeline said that this client can call on him too. Like if she loses things in her house, or if she's doing healings on other people and she needs to call crystals or unicorns or Reikis through the Akasha field, he, the little goblin, can help her. And I go to a different chakra. It was actually just a different dimension. And I saw this loom weaver, and she was just being so cryptic. Like, she wasn't giving me a whole lot. But I was looking inside the loom, and all of a sudden I was in this white room, and a ram came forward, and the ram led me out of the room into the Swiss Alps. And it was beautiful, and the air was crisp. It was the best air I have ever breathed. And I said, "What are we doing here?" And I looked up, and I could see her lungs. Like right out, huge lungs. And I said, "Oh, she needs help with breathing, like air circulation." And my client wasn't feeling well like the other day, so that might have been it too. And I was like, "Okay, well, I need to call in a bird to help me with wind." And I said, "Oh, let me call an eagle." No, an albatross. I was like, "That's not big enough. Let me call a phoenix." I said, "That's not big enough." And so I called my dragon Ankh in. He's a guardian of mine, and he's like this huge massive dragon. And he came, and then he ended up breathing fire like around her lungs to like get anything, the impurities off. And then he encapsulated her lungs in dragon scales, which I had never seen before, like his dragon scales. And it was like incubating in there and helping with like very deep cellular healing. And then all of a sudden the scales fell off, and the goblin from the other dimension ran inside and started stuffing all the dragon scales in this backpack and then put it on. And then he like waved to me, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "She wants these." And it was the version of her from the other timeline, I guess, to use with healing. And I asked Ankh the dragon, I was like, "Is that okay with you?" And he was like, "Sure." And then he like ran off through the other dimension. Ooh, the sun's coming in here. Okay. So then I go into a different chakra, and I picked up on a timeline of theirs that was like in the 50s. And they were married to this Air Force person. But anyway, my head started burning so bad. Like my third eye felt like it was on fire. It was like excruciating. And I was like, okay. I gotta just get up in wherever this is. Okay, because I could hear somebody calling me as well. Okay, so this is where we take a huge pivot. So I go in this other dimension, and there's just fire everywhere. Blazing fire, just all consuming. There's people yelling, all kinds of craziness going on, okay? And I saw this big giant phoenix, huge phoenix. And it was just like out of control, but I could tell the phoenix was like scared and wasn't like, didn't know what it was doing. And so I called Onken with me, my dragon. I was like, hey, can you get her to chill out? Okay, so they were like breathing fire at each other, and eventually like Onk got her to like settle down. And I went over, and she was kind of like laying on the ground. He didn't hurt her. She was just like, you know. And so I walk over to her, and I'm like, what is happening? What is going on? And I said, we need to take her to the other timeline, the child that I had met before. I said she can heal her. So we packed her up and took her back over there, and we went back into the cottage, and the other timeline shrunk her down so she could fit on the table that we were originally eating bread on. And I found this device on her head right here, like it was a metal device, and I was like, I don't know where this came from, because it didn't come from the timeline she was in. I said the energetics, that's not a device that they would have. And so that timeline version gave the device to the goblin and said, I want you to go find whoever put this on her. And then he like went off. He was like, got it. And so we got her on the table, and we're healing. And I called the client's oversoul forward, and I was like, hey, what is going on here? And all of a sudden, the goblin came back with the dude that had put that thing on the phoenix. And the phoenix is a part of my client. Like, it's not that she was the phoenix, but she's worked with phoenixes in a lot of different incarnations, and that was just like one of her, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a familiar necessarily, more like a friend. Okay. I wish I guess could be a familiar. But the goblin brought the man there, and the different timeline version of her, the child, the healer, was like, why did you do this? And the guy didn't want to answer. And then she got like really big, and she was like, you're going to tell me why you did this to her. And then the guy was explaining that, and he was like in his 20s, he was explaining that all these humans, like people that haven't woken up to their magic, found out that his family was a magical family, and they ended up his parents, and he was a survivor. And that he was just filled with so much rage and anger, and he was actually a timeline traveler. Like, that was one of his gifts, is that he could blip in and out at different time and space points, and he actually found that device in a different timeline. And she was like, well, why were you looking for the phoenix? And he was like, well, I needed some type of creature that could help me with this and help me with vengeance, right? And so he found the phoenix and like put it on her. And then the other timeline was explaining, was like, don't you see how what you did to her is exactly what those people did to your parents? Like, you're out here making her create all this destruction. And like, he didn't see it in that perceptual lens. And then he just started like crying his eyes out, and he was like, I'm just so upset about my parents, you know, all this stuff. And we were all showing a lot of compassion to him, even though like what he did was not good, right? But the oversoul and me and her and my dragon and the goblin, and we're like, okay, well, you have to go into therapy and figure out, you know, like how to heal all these things. So some fairy guards came forward, and they're like, hey, we're actually going to take you to go to a rehabilitation place and to help you with healing and sort through all of this. And so he was actually really grateful for that, and they took him on. And then we continued to work on her phoenix, and I asked what was going to happen. They said that she was going to go back to her timeline as a guarder and protector of the timeline and the people there, like making sure oppression and injustices don't happen in that timeline. And she wasn't going to remember those things that happened because of that thing that was put on her. In the other timeline, her oversoul and my dragon and then the goblin were all working on her, and they said that she would be okay. So that's who called me in when my head was like on fire. It was like her oversoul saying, hey, I need you to come work on this for me. You would like a multidimensional chakra scan so you can understand yourself on deeper levels. You can go to my profile and click, or check the description box here below or the comments, and then let me know if this message resonated with you or if it brought anything forward.